You're in the Waterloop.
Waterloop. Welcome to Waterloop, the nonprofit news outlet exploring solutions for sustainability in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. For this episode, we are going in the newsroom with Bob Crossen. He is editorial director for Endeavor Business Media's Water Group. So Bob oversees two big key industry publications, WaterWorld and Wastewater Digest. I'm going to talk to Bob about his recent coverage around PFAS and even SRFs. Also talk about some other headlines that have caught my attention and share some of the things I've been up to with Waterloop. Bob, thank you for coming on and coming in the newsroom.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. It's always great to chat with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I know you're up in the Chicagoland area. I've always followed, I know you're a big avid cyclist, biker, all that kind of thing. You got over an injury a year or so ago, a crash. How's the bike life going this time of year in Chicago?
It's going pretty well, although it's still pretty cold up here. We're still going down into the 40s. It's been the 40s for most of this week, high 40s, low 50s. But we've had a couple of days where it's been nice in the 70s, but they've been few and far between so far. Our winter seems to be longer and longer, unfortunately. So still doing stuff inside on the trainer, but getting out on some group rides on Saturdays. So
nice. Do you get by any waterways or water bodies when you're out there riding?
Yeah, a lot of times our group rides, depending on the routes that we take, we often are headed east, which would take us to Lake Michigan. So it's pretty common that we get up to Lake Michigan, and boy, I'll tell you, with the cold and just the major temperature fluctuations, the wind, as soon as you see that lake the wind coming off it makes it riding a bike a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it's like a refrigerator effect too. That water's colder, probably colder than the air right now, and then it's just you got the air coming off it like an air conditioner, right? It just freezing you.
Yeah, it's both the cold and the fact that like you're fighting against the wind on a bike, so it's like it just adds more effort. So
yeah, that indoor trainer comes in handy until you warm
100%
up.
For Chicago and these northern bike riders, we hit the indoor trainer quite a bit. So
yeah. Well, shifting to some big news recently out of EPA around PFAS. A lot of people have seen this. I wanted to talk to you because you follow this issue very closely, follow EPA closely, and had some good stories looking at their news around PFAS regulations. Could you break down what has recently happened?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this before we started recording. My thought was to kind of break it into a tale of three parts, basically. So that there's the first part is that EPA made this strategic update on like kind of their intentions for PFAS across the entire agency, not just water. The second part of that was the White House budget proposal announcement that came literally like 3 or 4 days after that. And then just within the past week, EPA announced how it will be addressing the MCLs that were finalized last year. So
those are the drinking water standards for
correct.
Yeah, for folks that might not know the MCL lingo. Yeah, maximum contaminant limit. Yep.
Yeah. So those were finalized last year. It covered PFOA and PFOS were the two primary ones that they focused on. There were 4 others as part of a hazard index. I'll kind of explain a little bit more of that once we get to that news story, but I wanted to first talk about some of the efforts on the strategic announcements that I was talking about. So that was on April 28th. There was a huge like litany of bullet points of kind of like all the different things they want to do across the entire agency. Like I said, this is not their strategy is holistic. It's not just about water. They're kind of making a bunch of different points about a bunch of different markets that will impact a bunch of different industries. But for water, we kind of pulled out, I think, 7 key bullet points from it. So I'm just going to read off a couple of them here. So one was dedicating an agency lead for PFAS. Then they also want to implement a testing strategy under the Toxic Substances Control Act, Section 4. And they want to add PFAS to the toxic release inventory in line with congressional direction from the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. So one of the things with these PFAS, one of the big, kind of like the precursor, the thing that really set things off was the DoD stuff from years ago with the AFFF foam, which is this firefighting foam that they use on military bases, airports, and all of that. And the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act had some provisions relating to PFAS in it. And so it sounds like for this toxic release inventory thing, they want to use that information to inform the TRI edition. And then they want to have a more comprehensive testing strategy. And then they also say that they want to use the Safe Drinking Water Act to investigate and address, quote, immediate endangerment. So what I'm getting kind of from these first 4 bullet points is this idea that they want a more strategic triage of PFAS to address PFAS by addressing this immediate endangerment and using things that are already on the books rather than making something new. That's kind of the way I have interpreted that. And then the final 3 points was advancing remediation efforts where drinking water supplies are impacted by contamination, work with states to assess risks from contamination, and then developing effluent limitation guidelines. So it sounds like they want to, like I said, this is kind of the second set here. For this, I kind of see it as, developing analytical and risk assessment tools will inform the risk assessments for the states. That will also inform the effluent limitation guidelines, and then eventually the remediation efforts and cleanup that would come from that. The effluent limitation guidelines, interestingly enough, the day after Trump was Trump got into office, was his inauguration was January 20th. On January 21st, the administration withdrew a pending Biden proposal that would limit PFAS in effluent for the same things that they called out as being part of their strategy here. So it sounds like there's just a difference in approach, which I think is pretty obvious to most people who have been watching the Trump administration versus the Biden administration. Some of the intentions or the goalposts are the same thing, but how they want to get there is very different.
Yeah, I have their press release pulled up here on my screen too, and it's an extensive list of bullet points, right? Grouped around strengthening the science, fulfilling statutory obligations, building partnerships, enhancing communication. It seems like a package that maybe a lot of people wouldn't have expected out of this administration or out of this EPA. There's a lot that it seems like they are going to be, quote, going after PFAS through a lot of these pieces here, a different strategy or a difference in approach. Like you said, I think it's worth noting that some PFAS work did start under the first Trump administration.
Yeah, it did.
So this is not new to them or this EPA. And then, Administrator Zeldin, when he was a member in Congress, PFAS was an issue in his district. And so he's kind of dealt with it as a legislator. And I think maybe that has kind of, equipped him to kind of lead this push. But I would just say, I think I'm among many people that it might be a little surprised or let's say pleasantly surprised if you're worried about PFAS to see this comprehensive of an approach. Proof is in the pudding, right? Devil's in the details, all that kind of thing. But really a lot of things jump out. I just want to flag a couple of the bullet points that jump out to me, at least the language is, going for polluter pays and protecting passive receivers. This is something like the water industry and utilities have been talking about, is like, we are not the source of PFAS. This is coming from upstream. Go after the source, at the tap, if you will, the source of that pollution, and don't hold us liable. So that's notable for me. The idea of effluent limitation guidelines for PFAS, that gets right at the idea of cutting this stuff off at the source. Again, we'll see what really comes of that. And a couple of the pieces, really, really interesting working with Tosca and others. But yeah, continue on and sharing your analysis and what other news has come out here.
Yeah. Before I move on, I did want to point that you mentioned that point of the going after like that polluter pays model. This has been like a big thing for the utility sector for a long time, and it really revolves around the comprehensive environmental response or Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA, more commonly known as Superfund. And a lot of the argument about like the Biden administration added PFOA and PFOS to it as hazardous substances. And a lot of the utility sector is like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because now you're just saying blanket anyone who has this now has like this site that needs to be remediated, and we're just passive receivers. Like, it just comes into our plant. We don't make this stuff. We're trying to remove it. We're trying to benefit the environment. And so their concern was like, where does the liability actually go? And so this polluter pays model is like, that idea is to put the liability onto the manufacturers of things rather than these water and wastewater utilities. So I just wanted to make that point there, just to kind of give some additional context to everything. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just to throw in some commentary, it's again interesting because you have an administration that's very pro-business, pro-industry, pro-manufacturing, growth, development, et cetera, and kind of holding industry's feet to the fire might be something you would expect, under a Democratic administration. So again, we're going to see how that really, I think, shakes out, but logically it makes so much sense that to stop the stuff at the source and protect the country's utilities that are again receivers of this. But go on, Bob.
The environmental stewards.
yeah exactly.
So the next step of this was, so that whole strategic thing was April 28th. On May 2nd, so just less than a week after that, the White House shared its budget proposal, which included a total net cut of $4.2 billion for the entire EPA agency. And of that $4.2 billion, $2.46 billion was specifically targeting cuts to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And these are like two of the primary federal vehicles for funding for many, many years now. This has been a continuing resolution. There's money every year that's available for this. States put together implementation plans. The utilities submit things to the state. The state takes all that, says, here's what we plan to do with the money. They submit that to EPA. EPA says, you're cleared for these things, sends it back to the state, and then it goes in. And the way those funds work is that they're low interest loans. So they're very useful for a utility that's looking to not increase rates by a lot of money, because they can get this really low interest financing. But all of the financing is supposed to go back into the state coffers that allow them to then refunnel that back into the state for future projects. So the idea is that it would grow and revolve on itself over time. And so cutting this it could be, I think, net negative for the industry overall. But one thing I wanted to kind of note here is that I've had conversations with utility directors of all different sizes and everything. The sentiment that I tend to get from like these mid to small utilities, especially the small ones, is like, to them, they're like, we never see this money anyway, so it almost doesn't matter to us. Whereas like the larger utilities are like, we really need this because our projects are enormous. I mean, we're talking about, I think within the past 5 years, I know of at least 3 or 4 $1 billion projects or bigger in the United States. Like, these are huge, enormous projects, right? And
well,
so
absolutely. I just I've in some of my recent travels to produce content for Waterloop, I've stood inside some of those facilities. I was at a plant in Houston that was $1 billion project, Northeast Water Purification Plant, huge. To add 320 million gallons a day of treatment capacity. I was just out in California visiting the site of Pure Water San Diego, which is over $1.2 billion, I think, project. Up in Sacramento, they just had a Echo Water. They did a SAC sewer, $1 billion project, and these are critical to these parts of the country to delivering clean water, to treating waste, to sustainability, and they're huge economic drivers too. I've been in the active construction sites. You've got people working. I flagged one other story, Bob, of just St. Petersburg, Florida, trying to build resilience. They're victim to all those hurricanes down there, so they want to really kind of fortify their wastewater treatment plants, looking at a $500 million investment, right? And that's just these are not one-offs. This is like the investment that's happening across the country. So just wanted to kind of further illustrate your point there.
Yeah. And also in Florida, this was announced, I think, last year that Miami-Dade County broke ground on its $1 billion sewer project as well. So like you have huge, enormous projects for these major metro areas that are going on right now. And not to mention, there's all this other stuff that they have to do with lead and copper and things like that. So it's like the burdens placed on utilities is at an all-time high. I feel like it seems like they have more things to worry about than ever before.
Yeah.
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
think I saw in one of your stories, one of the water industry folks might have been quoted about, not over 90% of our funds are not from the federal government, right? They're coming from ratepayers mostly, from the local communities.
Yeah. Well, and to add to that too, one of the other quotes that we had from Water Environment Federation was that over the past decade, local ratepayer water bills have increased nearly 5 times faster than inflation. So not only is like cutting down on that is the argument from, I guess, so we can go into this part of the budget proposal. And again, this is just the budget proposal from the White House. I want to make it really clear that like this is not final. This is just basically the intention of what the Trump White House wants to see from EPA. How it shakes out in Congress, which we're following this week with the budget process and everything right now, how that shakes out, we don't really have a clear beat on just yet. But so this isn't like actually going into action at this moment in time, but I wanted to share some of the thoughts that we saw. So I mentioned the ratepayer water bill increases because that was kind of the primary argument from a lot of the industry leaders was, you remove this type of low interest financing and you're going to create this problem where utilities are going to have to raise rates, and they already have been raising them faster than they wanted to in the first place. But I think that also points to another issue that I've heard for many years, that water and wastewater utilities have been under costing how much it actually is to make clean water, both drinking and for discharge of wastewater to clean it and send it back to the environment. We've been undercharging for so long, and it's really, really catching up to us now.
Yeah, no, that makes tons of sense. You mentioned Congress makes these kind of ultimate budget decisions, and I think that there was during the first Trump administration, the White House proposed really drastic cuts to the SRF back then as well. Maybe not quite this far, which is getting close.
This is almost
proposing
90%.
to eliminate them, right? And Congress did not go for that kind of cut last Trump administration. I know that there's different dynamics now in a lot of ways, but I don't see Congress going along with big cuts to the SRFs again. The dollars are making differences in communities that are blue and red. Every member up there has projects in their districts that have been key to their communities, that have been key to their constituents, and that have put people to work and have helped fuel the local economy. I don't see that happening. That's my foretelling of it.
I agree with you on that. I can't see them making cuts of this nature. I mean, it's 88%, I think, is the exact figure. But I mean, when you're talking about a 90% cut on funding, I find it hard to believe that it would be very popular to do, especially considering like a lot of the states that would likely get this type of funding are I mean, I would imagine are red states, but maybe my understanding of that isn't incorrect. But
no, I think there's analysis out there that we can pull or whatever, but it's definitely spread across the board. It's I don't think these projects are they're pretty politically evenly distributed, if you will.
Yeah.
I even the bipartisan infrastructure law, those dollars have been making a difference in communities too when it comes to water infrastructure. I had a recent conversation with Mae Stevens of Banner Public Affairs, and she alluded to the idea that there is early interest in reauthorizing a package like that by the end of this 2-year Congress. Now that's a long way to go, but that's a very connected Washington insider that sees appetite for actually continuing to fund infrastructure at a high level. So
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to some folks about this too, because so there were in the transportation sector, that's kind of how they do it. They do like this highway bill every 4 years or whatever. They do send out a bunch of money to do all these different projects. And so what this proposal from White House seems like is like, hey, you got your EJA money. You got your EJA money. We have these other programs. We have WIFIA. We have USDA grants and funding that's out there. You have all of these options available to you. It almost seems like they want to use this like every 4 or 5 years or whatever, do a funding bill like they would a highway bill for water, wastewater. Whether that comes together or not, we'll see. It really just depends on the Congress and who wants to put forth that stuff. But one of the things I wanted to mention two comments from the White House on this, because in their document that sent all of this information of their budget, they did provide a couple of reasons for why they wanted to make specifically the SRF cuts. And the first is this idea of cooperative federalism, which seems to be showing up almost everywhere with a lot of Trump's efforts of making the states have more authority over the things in their states and reducing the federal government's like imposition upon the states. So in this regard, when it came to these cuts, they're like, hey, states, you need to fund your own water, wastewater programs. We're not going to always be able to fund you from the federal government. That was kind of one of the arguments. And then the second argument, which we've been trying to put this out there for a long time, is that Congress has started doing earmarks. I think starting in 2022, they've been earmarking things. Earmarks used to be a thing, but they were like a separate bucket. But now they're earmarking from the SRF funding. So this allocation of funding, Congress people are saying, I want this much for this project in my district. And by the time the money gets to the states, some states only get about 50% of what they requested from EPA and were approved from EPA because it went through this process. So the state itself isn't able to implement its state plan to the fullest extent that it can because the Congress people are getting the money pulled out before it even reaches the state for distribution. And that was specifically mentioned in the budget proposal from the White House as something that they wanted to get away from because they thought that it was not being handled properly.
Well, I've heard negative feedback from water people about that earmarking of SRFs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're superseding the states themselves, who have a very methodical processes for how they evaluate projects and where those dollars should go, and then you just have members of Congress kind of coming in to send the checks to their districts, right? That's not how this should happen. So, credit for trying to shift away from the earmarking, but just getting rid of the SRFs probably isn't not, that's something else. Cooperative federalism, that's funny because states do want to have more control of their policies, like decisions maybe about what waterways are protected or education or whatever the policy area is. The flow of funds from the federal government, and calling that cooperative federalism is a little bit different. That's a funny label there. I wanted to also kind of pick up on 2 points and see what your thoughts are on these or what you might know. I saw like, hey, let's shift toward WIFIA more instead of SRFs. But WIFIA seems to be, and I haven't tracked this totally that well, but it seems to be really set up for like the big
100%.
projects and the big cities that can put that kind of thing together. So I don't know that like just shifting over to WIFIA instead of SRFs is wise. There's been people saying that the WIFIA program could stand to grow even, but yeah, I don't know about trade-off there.
I was going to say they don't, like the SRF and the WIFIA to me don't achieve the same goals in my mind. Like you said, like WIFIA projects tend to be rather large. They're for like the big metro utilities. And maybe there's something to be said there of like, all right, well, large metro utilities, you have access to these funds. Maybe there should be some type of cap on size for who's able to get SRF funding or something like that could go into effect. But then you're adding more regulatory or more like bureaucratic burden to try and get money out. Which also seems to be kind of an effort from the Trump administration to like reduce a lot of the bureaucratic red tape to try and make things like move along. right now, kind of at the expense of some regulatory or environmental concerns. But it does seem to be another theme of the administration, that cooperative federalism, and then like kind of cutting back the red tape.
You also mentioned how SRFs are typically been utilized by, the mid to larger size systems, and the smaller ones have said, hey, we don't get this anyway. I think there was an effort over the past few years, especially because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, to try to change that a bit and try to help these smaller communities access SRF dollars, even through like the Water TA program. So, I think that was a good thing, getting these monies in the hands of those smaller communities. What thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, I agree. I think there was a lot in the infrastructure bill of like this whole idea of disadvantaged communities. What a disadvantaged community was left up to each individual state for that. But that would be like, presumably the disadvantaged communities are going to be your smaller ones. But one of the things that has always kind of been the burden for these smaller utilities is the assistance that they need to apply. Some of these processes, like I said, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in them. There's application forms and then a whole process that goes through all these different steps. I mean, there's grant underwriters for a reason, kind of a thing. And a lot of those smaller utilities, they just need that type of assistance, and there have been efforts to provide that, and there are certainly organizations in the water sector that are trying to achieve that as well. But I don't think that it's reaching all of these utilities. I mean, there are so many 10,000 person systems or smaller in the United States. I would say the vast majority, well, maybe not the vast majority, but a great deal of the utilities in the United States are of that size or smaller, or are 50,000 people or smaller. That's probably the vast majority of all of them. So finding ways to get them in at the table to even achieve this, and giving them cheap or free tools to apply, is really kind of, I think, what needs to happen. They need to have this access without adding burden to what they do on a day-to-day, because for a small 10,000 person community system or something like that, the person who's running that plant might also be mowing the parks, might also be filling the potholes.
Literally.
Yes. Yeah. So like, where do they have the time to like navigate the bureaucracy of federal funding and financing?
Before we leave this topic and move to the other EPA announcement, I think I should mention, these are loans, right? So this is not just money that the federal government is giving away and never seeing again. I think trying to curtail the federal budget and federal spending, there's some definite benefits to that. But SRF dollars are loan that has a great kind of cyclical piece that you pointed out in the beginning. So going to move on to the next announcement. Just want to remind listeners